Steven and Peridot continue to be adorable together. Peridot having to look elsewhere while Steven uses the bathroom, Steven teaching Peridot how rain works with the aid of soup, Peridot cracking to Steven.
I haven't cracked!
Peridot amazed at Steven's strength.
Whoa!
Steven piggybacking Peridot to access a control panel, and the two cornering themselves. All of those are smile-inducing interactions. I can't help but wonder if the piggyback scene was a mild foreshadowing that Steven's first gem fusion will include Peridot. After the previous episode, I thought it was a possibility, but now it almost seems inevitable. It would really force the rest of the gems to see Peridot as part of the group. It would be hilarious if their fusion actually ends up being weaker than Steven by default. I doubt that's gonna happen since all fusions seem additive, but I can't help but think of bad fusions in Dragon Ball Z and chuckle at that concept applied towards Steven Universe. If they do fuse, I assume it would be after Peridot gains an ability to summon a weapon though. For a brief moment I actually thought this episode would lead to Peridot discovering her summon weapon when her and Steven were in trouble. This episode reveals a bunch of tidbits of information regarding Homeworld and Peridot herself. Peridot states that she doesn't know anything without her screen, which pertains both to her lack of experience outside her designated research duties and likely harks back to her relatively young age. Her being a young gem is essentially confirmed when she states,
I wasn't lucky enough to be around for that.
The phrasing of lucky enough to be around implies she did not exist when the experiment began. She studied the research and got involved with the project fairly recently, as she's only read
over a few hundred years of reports.
As we know, a few hundred years is pretty much nothing when it comes to gem age. It's interesting to note Peridot is ignorant of rain when Lapis has an ability to control water. This could imply different things. Homeworld may have had large sources of water in the past, but has since been transformed and no longer does in the current time. That can be one of many potential reasons as to why Lapis thinks it changed so drastically. Or Lapis herself was born on a different planet entirely. Peridot asks if Mom and Dad are other planets, so a decent amount of gems must have originated outside of Homeworld, and if that is the case with Lapis, draining the life of other planets to create more gems has been going on for an extremely long time, long before Earth was used as an attempted factory. One thing I love about this episode is that, despite Peridot really taking a shine to Steven, she's still shown to be incredibly patriotic of Homeworld and speaks of its conquests and goals with glee. That duality presents plenty of material for a highly interesting character. Her boastful laugh after taking pride in reading reports was a phenomenal indicator of her dedication to Homeworld. She also does not see gem shards as potential lives she is messing with. They are merely scraps for an experiment. For all her endearing qualities and the seeming parademtion that is to come, Peridot is still very much a product of Homeworld and she holds it in the highest regard. Peridot's instinct of self-preservation seems in contrast to her patriotism toward Homeworld though. If she actually succeeds in stopping the cluster, what would Homeworld do to her as punishment? Harvesting her might be letting her off easy. Has Peridot considered this? Or are her thoughts only swarming with immediate self-preservation with no foresight to the future? I hope this is a concept that is explored in future episodes. And of course we get more exposition regarding the cluster. It was indeed from a massive amount of gem shards. Its purpose is to be a gem geoweapon, and its size after the emergence would be bigger than the Earth. I imagined a Godzilla-sized fusion, but this is on a whole different scale. The mere emergence of the cluster would result in the Earth splitting open and everyone dying. By the way, a future episode is called Gem Drill. I think we all have a solid prediction as to what that episode is going to be about now. As for the cluster being a geoweapon, that is further evidence that all Homeworld sees fusion as is a militaristic application. Peridot's visual appearance in this episode was a bit odd. The animation team behind this episode seemed to have made Peridot's limbs a bit slimmer than in the prior episode. This small change makes her head look awkwardly huge relative to her body. It is a subtle difference, but I hope they draw Peridot with slightly thicker and curvier limbs for future episodes. My main criticism with When It Rains is that I have a huge problem with the premise of this episode, and that's the crystal gems leaving Steven alone with Peridot. It is low security at its maximum, and at that point had Peridot wanted to escape the house and continue being on the run, nothing would be stopping her. While Pearl makes the claim that Peridot is harmless, she could be concealing abilities until an opportunity presents itself. In the worst and most extreme hypothetical scenario, Peridot could have reached Yellow Diamond and is waiting to be picked up, and now has a window to grab Steven and take him with her. We as viewers know for certain these things won't happen, and Peridot is powerless to harm Steven, but that's not an assumption to make lightly on the part of the Crystal Gems considering how militaristic Homeworld is. Basically, for me to enjoy this episode to its fullest, I have to willfully ignore the idiocy of Pearl and Garnet. I expect gross negligence from Amethyst, as that is in line with her character, but Garnet, and especially Pearl, leaving Steven alone with Peridot is unthinkable. When I saw the preview, I thought the rationale would be that Garnet used her future vision to determine that every possible future route had Steven and Peridot remain in the temple. But even that didn't happen. There was nothing in the episode to justify the massive lapse in judgment from the Crystal Gem's decision to leave Steven alone. My other complaint again relates to the premise for the episode. All the information Peridot gave to Steven could have been given without going to kindergarten, which invalidates the entire trip there. In fact, the only information we didn't already have from last episode was about the number of shards used, the exact location of the cluster, and that it will be larger than the Earth after it emerges. Perhaps Peridot deceived Steven and wanted to check on the current status of the cluster, or more deviously, that would have been a great opportunity to try to communicate with Homeworld again. But it didn't particularly appear that way. Her plea that she needed to go to kindergarten to show Steven about the cluster, making it seem like we would get some incredibly juicy information that can't just be told in words, her plea seemed quite genuine. Therefore, it felt like a letdown and a bit of a farce that what she tells Steven was something she could have easily told him back at the temple. For me, these criticisms are central to the episode's entire purpose. The way this episode was created feels like a puzzle that was put together by cutting some of the pieces with scissors in order to make them fit. And therefore I can't commend this episode as a great one. The fun interactions between Steven and Peridot still made it enjoyable to watch, however, so if I had to describe the episode I would call it, alright. It seems like the Crewniverse is trying to spice up events that would otherwise be a bit plain at the expense of the plot being fully coherent and the characters staying in character. However, this episode does just seem to be a lead up to the next one. We didn't get that Starfade at the end, which definitely left tons of viewers confused and wondering why the episode was cut off partway through. Lead-up episodes are generally not as amazing as what they lead into, so I'm crossing my fingers for something amazing next week. Thanks for listening to my review, and if you enjoyed the content, feel free to check out my other Steven Universe or Adventure Time videos.